The great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had a brilliant idea, and it consisted of imagining that life, our life, would be repeated over and over again, with every minute detailed for all eternity. There will be the laughter and the weeping, the hours of exaltation and the darkness, the joy and the pain of all our wounds. Nothing we could do then to change what was called to do what was meant to be. Nietzsche thought of this as a personal experiment that would allow him to contemplate his own existence without the intolerable heat of intervention. There is of wanting to change what is already hopeless. This happens all the time when we think of the past and fantasize, imagining that we can change the decisions already taken and consequently the change of events that follow. It is an inner fire that tortures us, a form of infinite cruelty that we exercise against ourselves. Nietzsche also understands this and tackles these pernicious fantasies, assuming that one's own life, yours and mine, must have been one way and not another, because the person always makes the best decisions according to their knowledge and state of mind at the time. Nietzsche turns to this ideal of eternal recurrence, of life that repeats itself as permanence and dynamics to make us see the beauty of the necessary, the sweetness of the inevitable. This Stoic principle, derived from Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, is known as amor fati, which means love of fate. However, there is an important difference. While for the Stoics, this love is a kind of seamless resistance, for Nietzsche it is a festive eagerness, a carnivalesque celebration of all that has been and is happily doomed to be again. Nietzsche speaks of this notion in The Gay Science and in Ecce Homo, assuming himself as a tragic hero who has renounced indifference to the life and sings celebratory in his fall. Nietzsche was retired in the Swiss Alps, sunk in a state of reflective slumber that already anticipated his definitive psychic breakdown. By that time, his academic career is a failure. His books failed to generate any interest in anyone. He has sought a career as a freelance writer, but has not succeeded. To the accumulation of failure is added a fragile health that stings him day and night, making his existence a constant scene of disasters. However, in the midst of all these mental and bodily pains, Nietzsche suddenly finds in his daily work a deep and unavoidable pleasure. This is the context in which this brilliant man found the path of a hope founded on the acceptance from the will, the joy of consciousness, and the certainty that there is something that always happens to be convenient. And this is how, tucked in his bed, he becomes a true enthusiast of life as it is and not as we want it to be. He has developed a vital force that exalts him and makes him scream, suddenly inflamed by the truth of a self-consciousness that has finally been understood to the root. Amor fati is above all a revolt against the lamentations of those who tend to suppose that their present pain derives from a wrong decision in the past. These endless weeping people dream of transferring the knowledge of the present moment to the past, to change their route. It is nonsense. And Nietzsche knew well that what they really want is to act as gods, as lords of time, with the capricious power to renounce as children want to do everything they no longer like. Nietzsche is confident in the powers of life, which is always true to itself. Nietzsche affirms that he does not wish anything to be different, neither yesterday nor tomorrow, not even in eternity, which is too great a measure to fit into the consciousness of man. He despises the idealists who seek to escape the fires of the world by taking refuge in the trenches of their fantasy. He knows that every retrospective glance must necessarily be a mirage, or more precisely, a trap. For Nietzsche, this is a theoretical delusion because he knows that life is more, much more, than the images we create of it. Thus, amor fati is first and foremost an act of reconciliation, an active acceptance of the orb in which we move as conscious creatures. There is no more. Every decision made is the child of its circumstance, and this includes you. It is in vain to suppose that the ills or sufferings we now face are our absolute responsibility. Life is not editable. The days of life are what they are and fall into place like the pieces of a prodigious puzzle. This is how the bad and the good are relative. The tragic has its sweetness and the honey of victory has its dose of poison. What happens is that we don't know it yet, but we will know it when the time comes. Regret is for Nietzsche a complete stupidity as great as conceit. All we have is the deep and wild love for what we are becoming. The passions of the anxious and the abulia of the depressed are for Nietzsche essentially blindness. Amor fati helps us to find beauty in the universe of the everyday, whatever it may be. Amor fati helps us to discover the most absolute happiness, which consists in ceasing the struggle when the struggle is impossible. For Nietzsche, there is no vital pedagogy in what we do, just as there can be none in the growth of a root, the shivering of water in the wind, or the quarrels of moose in the middle of the forest. All this is pure movement of life, and we have nothing to do with it. To assume ourselves as central and defining figures in the spectacle of the world can only bring us great amounts of pain. This is like insisting on opening our barely healed wounds and doing it again and again as a kind of self-imposed punishment. The cowardly man does not trust in time. The cowardly man has understood nothing and lives a prisoner of an infernal illusion. The free man, on the other hand, has fallen in love with the radical force of the instant. He experienced the world with all its powers, just as it is, without filters. In doing so, he experiences himself in a total way, as very few have been able to do throughout history. Nietzsche enunciated by saying, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati. That one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. Not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it. All idealism is mendacity in the face of what is necessary, but love it." We can understand that this amor fati is above all an overcoming. There is no hatred, nostalgia, regret, or frustration that fits when we assumed life in its incommensurability. The critics of the author of the Antichrist suppose that this is to commit that which is criticized, that is, to adopt an equally idealistic behavior. For them, it is not possible to escape the circle of self-reproaches that we make to ourselves as a consequence of the nature of our mind. They say that thinking about our mistakes is a mechanism that our brain has, to prevent new absent-mindedness in the future and, as a consequence, to try to ensure our survival. Nietzsche transcends the prison of formalistic logic and seeks to embody a philosophy that helps man to endure loneliness, failure, betrayal, guilt, suffering, constant loss, and finally, death. Amor fati is to affirm life. Amor fati is to grasp beauty and discover the creative power of language, the constant eruption of poetry blossoming from all human wounds. Amor fati is serenity in the face of the overwhelming evidence of the mystery that surrounds us. Amor fati is the active acceptance of the conscious horror to which the soul of man is subjected since it is thrown into the world of causes and effects. Amor fati is not the resignation of the power of the will, but the counterbalance imposed by prudence. Amor fati is not a path, so many philosophies of existence propose, but a goal, perhaps the only goal to which we can aspire, which is to know that we have no other place to go, no other place to which we can legitimately call our home, if it is not the here, the now, the today, the forever, while it lasts. Nietzsche smiles from his non-existence and warns us. Who could against a man who sings while he is subjected to torment? The smile of the sufferer instills more terror in his adversaries than the mightiest of weapons. The eternal is today.